So, once upon a time, there was this kid named Pete. Pete lived in New York City, New York. And he liked living there. He grew up there, but recently things were different living there because his family had fallen under hard times. Pete was 15 years old at the time, and he wanted to try and help make ends meet. So Pete went around the city to various businesses, various people, asking if there were any odd jobs he could do, explaining he wanted to help his family pay the bills. Most places said, no, sorry, we don't have anything for you to do. Some places said you're too young. Some places just said they don't need any help. But for one reason or another, he was rejected. He had to go home and go out and try the next day, and the next, and the next. But then, on his 7th day of going around and asking if there was anything he could do for money, he found at a watch shop. They said, yes, there is something that you can do for us. You can open the door for people coming in and out. Pete said, that's it? Just be a doorman? Just open the door? And the owner of the watch shop said, yes, that's all you need to do. I'll pay you in cash to get around the labor laws. If anyone asks, you're just doing it because you want to be polite. And Pete thought that it was a really strange job, but he figured, well, maybe the owner of the watch shop is just trying to help him out. So he agreed. He said, okay, I'll be your doorman. I'll hold the door open for anyone who comes. And so Pete started work there the next day. He came in when the store opened at 6 a.m. He couldn't stay there all day because, again, he's too young. But he would work there for a bit. On weekdays he would go to school, and then he would come back and work the rest of the day. the watch shop owner wasn't lying. It really was the case that all he did there was to open doors for people coming and going. He would see people come in and buy watches and leave with a new watch on their wrists, or come in with a broken watch and leave with a fixed one. Sometimes he would see people come in with a watch and leave it there to be fixed overnight and leave without a watch on their wrist. He made steady money with this job. He was able to help his family with their bills. But he was rather bored of the job. It was very simple. There wasn't much to it. He kept coming in, doing his job, week after week. He saw all kinds of customers, started to be able to recognize some of them. Started to his mind started to be filled with narratives of who had what watch, whose watch was broken, whose got fixed, who had several watches, who had only one, who broke their watches often, who never broke their watches, who got the cheap ones, who got the expensive ones, the regulars and the one-time visitors. When all you do is hold the door open, you don't have much to do but pay attention. And so you learned a lot about the people who come to the watch shop. One day, late December, he overheard his parents. Pete overheard his parents talking about not being able to pay bills again. He thought they were fine, maybe for a time they were, but well, now they needed help again. He didn't let them know that he heard this. He didn't want them to worry, but the next day when he went into the watch shop, he asked the watch owner if there's anything that he could do to earn more money. he was 16 now, so he could have taken an actual job, albeit with limited hours. The owner sat back and thought for a second. And eventually he said, "Well, no, I'm afraid all my other positions are filled. We need a good doorman. So you stay the doorman, please." And Pete wasn't happy with this, of course, but he accepted that response. And he went back to opening the doors. But Pete couldn't just sit by and let his family go bankrupt, let them be unable to pay their bills. So Pete came up with a plan. He would come in late, just before closing. He would wait until the owner was distracted and steal one of the watches that was in need of repair. He would take the watch home, repair it himself, bring it back the next day, and then he would ask for a job as a watch repairman. He did like tinkering with things. He knew a good deal about mechanics, so he thought he would be able to figure it out. And so that night came right around 10 when the store was about to close. After the owner left the repair booth for the day, and while he was talking to the very last customer of the day, Pete snuck into the repair booth and grabbed one of the watches off of the table. And also grabbed some of the loose parts that looked like they went with the watch, and one or two of the tools that he didn't have but thought he might need. He put all that in his pockets, and then he left the store, holding the door for the last customer and the owner on the way out. He said goodbye, and he started to walk home. when Pete got home, thankfully it was a weekend. He didn't need to be up for school the next day. So he set up the watch and all the parts and took out the tools. He set that all up on his workbench. He started to work on the watch throughout the night. It was a simple fix. Some of the gears were misaligned. So he was able to easily repair the watch and have it ready for the next day. The next day came. He got there even earlier than usual because he knows that the owner comes in about half an hour before the store opens. He wanted to get there when the owner did. So the owner comes and unlocks the door, and right then Pete walks up to him. The owner, his name is Jorge, says, "Oh, Pete, what are you doing here so early? I don't need you to hold the door open for me." And Pete says, "Hi, Jorge. I'm not here to hold the door open, actually. Take a look at this." And Pete takes the watch out of his pocket, and Jorge says, "What? That's the client's watch from yesterday. How did you get that? Why do you have that?" And Pete says, "Well, I took it when you weren't looking, and I repaired it. See?" And he shows Jorge that the watch is ticking. So Jorge says, "Oh, is this a way to show me that you want a different job?" Pete says, "Well, I'm showing you that I can repair things. I can repair watches, and that would be a better job." And Jorge says, "Well, just because you can fix some misaligned gears doesn't mean you can fix anything about a watch. I've been in this business for 30 years. I think I'm doing fine repairing watches myself." And Pete is disappointed at this, but he decides to try again. He says, "Please, Jorge, my family needs the money." Jorge sighs. He has a soft spot for that kind of predicament. He's been in that place himself. So he says, "Okay, you want to repair watches? You want to make more money? You can be my apprentice." And Pete's face lights up at this, because that'll be the money he needs, and hey, that sounds like a pretty cool job. That sounds like something he would be interested in. And so That day, Pete was no longer the doorman and was instead the watchmaker's apprentice. And he would shadow him as he would repair and also construct watches. And every once in a while, Jorge would give him a small test or challenge. Tell him, why don't you try cutting this spring, or why don't you try setting these hands? Things like that. And Pete wasn't very experienced, but he caught on quick. His hands were able to be delicate enough for the job. And so eventually Pete came to be a very experienced watchmaker and repairer. He started being able to take jobs on his own. Jorge would give him some assignments, things to fix. He could take watches home and fix them overnight, or fix them in the booth at the store. Eventually, his family was no longer in financial need, but Pete stayed stayed in that position as the watchmaker's apprentice. Stayed making and repairing watches. He was now no longer as knowledgeable about the people coming into the watch shop, but he was now much more knowledgeable about the watches. The watches, their inner workings, different models, different parts, pros and cons, good watches and bad watches, reliable and cheap ones. You could recognize a masterwork of a watch from a shoddy mass production watch. And you could recognize many different kinds of watches just from looking at them. Pete had never set out to become a watchmaker, never thought of it as something he wanted to do. He was interested in mechanics, but never really thought of that as his career, and never specifically thought about watches very much at all. But that that day, that week of desperation and wanting to help, led him to that day of accepting a job offer in a place he hadn't been before. Led him to being in that new space, and once again the desperation of his family needing money led him to push himself to learn to repair the watches. That led him to becoming the watchmaker's apprentice, and one day Jorge retired and Pete took over the watch shop, a watchmaker himself. He had, at that point, a long career of nearly 30 years making watches, repairing them. He had seen more watches than he ever knew there were, and repaired most of them in more ways than he could have imagined. And one day when he was reminiscing about the days when he first stumbled into this place, not really knowing or caring about watches, and definitely not knowing what this place would come to mean to him. He saw a little girl come in by herself with somewhat of a dour look on her face and ask, "Hey, is there any job you can offer me? I really need the money." And Pete smiled and said, "Oh, I know the perfect job. You can stand there and hold the door open." The girl thought that was a bit of a strange job. It would probably be boring, but she needed the money, so she would accept it. And she had no idea why this weird watch shop owner had such a huge smile on his face when she said okay. The end.